Okay, great. So the last panel, I'm just going to introduce the speakers that I've done before. We have, although all of them have already spoke before, so they need no introduction. Come on up. We have Henk Ovink, Marilyn Jordan Taylor, Amale Andraos, and Matthijs Bouw. Want to start?
And I'm not the first one to speak, but I'm going to be moderating this a bit. But I'd also like to give an introduction. We've heard a lot today. We really tried to go through an arc of understanding or talking about some of the concepts relating to resilience, to talk some of the tools. And one of the takeaways, I think, for all of us has been that this happens at all scales simultaneously, time scales as well, that we need to bring back together physical elements and social elements and governance elements. So that brings a lot of complexity with it. And often we've heard that for planners, architects, landscape architects, the traditional forms of planning, as we know them, haven't really worked to deal with these type of complexities that are related to resilience. And I really want to use this panel to explore with people who both have a background in academics and in practice, what could be the platforms for building resilience, and also then how can we teach those platforms in the design schools. Henk Ovink, as you know, has not only been the principal of Rebuild by Design and the water envoy, but he is trained as an architect and has been the director general of spatial planning and water in the Netherlands. But he's also been the driving force behind a number of chairs at Dutch universities in design schools called Design and Politics. We then, of course, have Dean Marilyn Taylor of PennDesign, who has a fantastic career at SOM. Dean Amale Andraos, who has a fantastic practice at Work AC, and I since recently also have an academic position and practice here. So I really hope that this panel can make this link between all the stuff that we have learned and all the stumbles that we're making in practicing this and getting our projects implemented. So Henk, thank you very much for being here with us.
Me for that's news. Okay, I expected to be last. Thank you, Matthijs. Yeah. Well, I did the lunch keynote, so you all remembered it. No, I have some slides. Yes. Design and politics. I will not talk about the part in lunch that's all about water. I will not talk so much about Rebuild by Design, although I will touch upon it a little. But I'll talk about the complexity of design in the realm of politics. And I'll go back to what I said during lunch. And there was a reporter from Political actually asking me a question. Do you want a new UN institution? And I said, oh my God, what did I say during lunch? You know, the last thing I want is the new UN institution. So I don't know if he's still in the room here, but please quote me on that. I do not want a new UN institution. But I do want a better understanding of politics. I don't think there are any politicians in the room today. Are there? No. And then we blame them for making wrong decisions. And that's wrong. We can't blame politicians of making wrong decisions. We can only blame ourselves of not informing politicians to make the right decisions. And forgetting to make that connection from a professional realm is actually not on them, but on us. So the connection between politicians and professionals from the design realm is that we have to inform their decision making. And they should not inform with their decisions what we should do. And it's a different position for a designer, because it takes for the designer to become active in the decision-making process instead of reactive to decisions being made and then they follow. I explained this is that when the politician is responsible for the yellow arrow, making decisions on a daily basis, you need the professional world to inform that decision making, both from looking back as much as from looking ahead. Now the last is, always perceived as a typical design capability, but the first is as critical. And the third, making the right decisions on a daily basis, is, hardly perceived as a design effort, which it should be. But this is the world we live in. And this is actually something that makes it very complex. Because it turns out that because of crisis, and those could be environmental, we talked about climate change today, or social injustice, but I also touched upon the geopolitical ones. The refugee crisis in Europe, or is actually impacting Europe, is causing this response. Is that the crisis hits us so hard that the only thing we do is look back instead of look ahead. And then the burden really comes on us as professionals. How do we grasp that future when it's actually lacking in the decision-making process? It's an old slide, but I like to use it sometimes. Nostalgia traps, said Woody Allen in Venice. And it does. Because once we're caught in nostalgia and saying, in the past we did it right, but designers and planners in the Netherlands like to think that the 70s are back. No way. It's 2015 and we're moving to 2030 and beyond. And nostalgia is not the perspective you want to be trapped in. But sometimes I like to use nostalgia to make my point. We have a problem as designers. We have a problem that we become followers. Followers of a process-driven approach instead of that of a one that is actually focused on the challenges ahead. A process where we follow the politicians and then blame them for making the wrong decisions. A process where we follow, like we discussed this morning, let's do a community engagement process that actually ensures the buy-in from the project we already designed, instead of using a collaborative approach to inform a design we've not yet made. If we don't change, we do have a problem. I talked about this. And this is the world, and this is only one image of the world at risk. And it's going to be tougher and harder. Drought at the origin of the Syrian crisis. Economic impact at the base of future failure of making decisions. Miami not knowing what to do when it comes to climate change. Yeah, Eric, the guy's there. Yeah, that's his head. Yeah. He's not drowning, he's doing research where the water is coming from. Actually, he is doing research where the water is coming from. It's like, oh, the sewage. Something's wrong with the sewage. No, this is the sea that's coming out of the sewage system. The water is salt, and it's a little scary. Kiribati, a small island state, somewhere else in the world. This picture is old. The house of the woman is gone. And part of those small island states will actually disappear. Now, because during lunch, and this is the problem with my talk now, I totally explained this slide. It looks like totally stupid to explain it again, but I add another layer. And this is this is the nightmare in the nice dream. You still remember. But there's a thing behind that that touches upon where designers come in. Is that to work on the opportunities, all the interdependencies from both origin and impact, there is this disconnect between the policies in place and the way we respond to that crisis. And that's, for one, is that policies are always based on the science and research of yesterday, never on the future. And it makes policy a failing frame for decision making and a failing frame for investment. So to mend the gap, we have to form these coalitions. And to form coalitions, we need designers. Now in the lunch I explained we need the 4 aspects, long-term and short-term, funding, collaboration, and institutional capacity. I also explained what the power of design is, and I excused myself for this terrible slide, and Matthijs is going to make a new one for me, he promised. But for this part of the discussion, I add a new layer. Because if we are able to use design in this resiliency process, if we are able to combine technique with opportunity, add the ambition, we'll get to execution, implementation, and development in the way we are perceived, and design is actually used from its power. But if in my world we can flip that track to an opposite approach, we will be able to redesign and redevelop the institutional world. And then design becomes part of the political decision-making process and is not something that is next to it. Then design is active on the political table instead of that it responds to what the political ambition is. And that's not a design group. It's an old picture from Sarkozy. He put together a design group, and he said, I have an ambition as president of France. I know what's happening, and the designers can help me in the opportunity. So I don't know, Matthijs borrowed him this slide. I'm not totally sure. But he got together this group, but of course it was a failing approach. He never was interested in collaboration. We need a different narrative. Mark Wallinger is a British artist. Anyone who knows this project? He dressed up as a bear. You know, this is Berlin, of course. You're all architects, so if you wouldn't recognize the building, you just failed your test. He dressed up as a bear, of course, in Berlin. And he was in the Neue Staatsgalerie every night. And after a week, people left food in the gallery in daytime. If we can get to a narrative that's that strong and appealing, that the collaboration starts to build something that is better and more than only a professional negotiation, a professional back and forth between groups, but something that really forms a partnership on the table of decision making, then we're at the heart of Rebuild by Design. Thank you.
Well, I'm very glad that I'm pre-planned to answer a different question than the one that Henk just asked, because I think it's a fantastic question and maybe we'll have a chance to come back to it. But we all got our assignments from Matthijs, and mine is to explain why we're at the end of the master plan. Now, I actually have thought this for a long time. Most of you know that I have tended in my career, as much as I love the small thing, to work on the huge and transformative projects where you had to think in an interdisciplinary way, where you had to bring in your friends, where you had to bring in people from other fields, whether you liked the point of view they brought in or not. And it has been an extraordinary experience learning to do that made me question the way we go about the engagement with public, the definition of master plans, how long they take to happen, and so forth. But I have to say that the questions and the challenges of resilience make my suspicions crystal clear. We are at the end of the master plan, which means we have the challenge to find a new narrative and a new set of tools to replace it with. So to move quickly through this conversation, I'm going to read most of my notes, or at least I'm going to try here. And I'm going to start with a really short reflection on Rebuild by Design. offer a couple of comments about what we're doing here is different and why it is so important to enlarge the network of people who are going to be with us as we move into resistance by design, and what it means to have a university community that we can all be a part of. And then I've got 5 key points to make about beyond master planning. So to start this off, a reflection on the experience of Rebuild by Design. The experience of working on the Rebuild by Design competition was life-changing for most of us. Our aspirations as designers were sky high, way above high water. When the 10 teams were selected, we looked around the room and saw immensely talented colleagues, each elated by the invitation to participate, but all a little wary of sharing too much, because it was a competition, wasn't it? And we wouldn't want to give away any secrets that we'd brought into the room. Only a few weeks later, we began to get the message. Building resilience started with on-site observation, got informed by science, then lost linearity in the face of complex ecologies and complicated human settings. There's no simplistic geometry in resilience. What does proof of concept mean when we are dealing with human lives and human livelihoods? Also, we learned that science sheds light, but stops short of either definition or solution. I loved Alan's example of that. Do I close the airport? Who knows? Actually, why, if there's water everywhere, would you be flying into the airport anyway? But not science's question or even engineering's question to answer. Now I have to figure out where I was in order to get back on that. That's the trouble with doing it this way. We learned that science sheds light, but stops short of either definition or solution. Predictions of damage have a wide range. Nature creates dynamic landscapes rather than static ones. There may be no such thing as the 100-year physical flood line, and rivers and shorelines drawn on maps are just a best guess of their location at some moment in time when an explorer sailed up the river. I wrote this before this morning. Because we are not now nomads, we are invested in places. We have to figure out what it means to stand our ground or to inhabit new ground we create to reduce our risks of loss. So what does all this mean for our new initiative, Resilience by Design? It still means we begin by reducing barriers, reshaping our language, defining new terms that facilitate communication rather than talking at cross purposes, and becoming colleagues in the creation and implementation of shared strategic vision. In a world of risks and uncertainties, it is important for designers to think about how we can replace static representations and illustrations with inherently dynamic new frameworks that guide investments while recognizing that they will necessarily change before the, quote, plan is approved, let alone completed. First principle, the static master plan no longer serves us, particularly when we are faced with long-term transformations, not short-term fixes. It needs to be replaced by strategic vision described in clear goals that will guide the investment in essential large-scale frameworks while welcoming the innumerable wonderful perturbation of local geographies and communities. So this is the long-font plan. It actually was a vision, not a master plan. And then this is a pretty remarkable example. More than 120 years after the L'Enfant Plan, highway engineers sitting in an office in Washington proposed for 3 decades or more extraordinary frameworks that would connect the United States with incredible mobility. It was realized by being kept alive during FDR's presidency, not by being built. It only was implemented in Eisenhower's terms. And while its impact on land use policy, on its creation on sprawl, have been unwanted results of the effort, the framework stood for nearly 100 years before the country's interstate highway system was declared complete. So what do? Well, what is a strategic vision? What are its characteristics? It's multi-purpose, it's multidisciplinary, it's multi-altered, and it's inherently dynamic. Design thinking, setting aside preconceptions to achieve new forms of solution, creates value. Integrated thinking identifies the contributions of sociology and community, of science and engineering, of lab research and field testing, of design and implementation, of community, both political, social, and left out. Today, strategic vision has gone global. In an amazing investment in resilience, the territory of Hong Kong, as it was about to be pulled back in to mainland China, relocated its international airport from a constrained center city site where landings were somehow harrowing, how many of us have done that one, to a site where it would be a centerpiece in a prolonged economic vitality of one of the East's great trading cities. We don't normally think of this about as a resilient project, but in a way it was. How do you sustain economic vitality in the face of unpredictable political change? There was thought that the third sector, the service economy, real estate development, would leave Hong Kong, and it didn't. But nonetheless, there was a framework put in place by the leaders, business as well as political, of Hong Kong, with a gift from the British of some money as they departed, so that the port and the airport of Hong Kong would have remained world class, would have had resilience, even if the city itself didn't. It didn't happen, but it's a cautionary and interesting story. Third point. Projects that advance the implementation of the vision are real-time experiments, the test of concept and hopefully the proof of concept. This means we must define the parameters of success and measure our progress in achieving them, as the Bloomberg administration did so brilliantly with the temporary improvements and alterations to Times Square. Pilot projects become incredibly valuable tools, not only for proof, but also for gaining and broadening support, getting feedback, learning what you really have accomplished with the investments that are required to build resilience, not just build the levee. Times Square shows the value of new signs and gallons of fresh paint, which allowed the Bloomberg administration to prove that the closing of Broadway at Times Square would not only save lives of pedestrians, but also improve retail sales, and maybe even the possibility of shared public space. Not all projects are such high impact at small scale. We in New York, for example, could complete the framework of the amazing Gateway project, new tunnels to Penn Station, redundant, replacing those that were, or giving us time to upgrade those that were so seriously damaged during Storm Sandy. And the replacement is new redundant tunnel capacity, but we could also use that capacity for an amazing intercity and regional commuter rail systems going from Trenton to Hartford, from Stamford to Philadelphia, really build an even stronger region for ourselves. We need to look for these kind of frameworks which tell us not just what we're designing, but why we're designing, and we as designers need to participate. We also need to participate in this. The business plan is key to moving the project and the vision forward. Who builds the prototype? Who builds the project? How do we measure its success? We need to explore new project-specific authorities who are established precisely to reframe boundaries to achieve goals efficiently. What are the true costs? Is inaction perhaps more expensive than multi-purpose action? Political decision-making begins the shift to technical implementation. Value capture may be invaluable in sharing costs. What you see here is London's Crossrail. London is close to completing an extraordinary response to the risk of its continuing economic vitality. The project is called Crossrail. It's a $15 billion transportation project that reduces travel time through the center of London and engages the perimeter much more effectively than the present tube could possibly do. It's a vision shared among government, business, and local political leadership, as well as individual communities, many of whom are voting taxes upon themselves to do station integration and other positive public realm investments around the new stations that are happening. Crossrail 1 is already spawning its successor, a second Crossrail line. The first is east-west, the second will be north-south. Many types of investors are required to make this happen. And that's the point I really want to make clear. We have to think of ourselves as investors, and I will come to that as my concluding remark. But need for a business plan makes clear that if designers are to be team leaders in generating the concepts and projects that will reduce risk, we need to become involved in implementation. This is one of those examples of how you figure out what it costs. Finally, resilience will flourish in a culture of mutual investment. Judy Rodin's concept of the resilience dividend is a culture shift. Investors are not just those people who work in banks and who are driven by gains and transaction fees. We, the family, we, the community, we, the people, must become investors too. Building now, inspired by the work of designers, informed by those in all related fields of inquiry and operation, is the investment responsibility we must all share. And here, thank you, Ellen, are the investors in the Hunts Point in the Bronx Rebuild Design project. So, in summary, regarding tools and aesthetics, obviously redefined here, the static master plan no longer serves us. Strategic vision must be multi-purpose, multidisciplinary, multi-altered, and dynamic. Projects are real-time experiments. The business plan is key to moving vision forward, and architects must participate. And resilience by design will flourish in a culture of mutual investment for shared benefit and public good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, everyone. Just in case you had doubt, I'm now speaking in my capacity of architect, not as dean, as principal of Work AC, so that's the first slide. It's been an amazing day. I think going back to my introduction, none of us can do this alone, clearly, and to see all the different perspectives on the question from top down, from bottom up, at what scale, how do we collaborate? Obviously, it's this coming together, and I think that's what's been really exciting about the day. And so I wanted to pick up on this notion of the strategic vision, and in particular, the question of vision. This is 49 Cities, a book we published the third edition of just this year, where we re-examined 49 cities through a kind of ecological lens. What was interesting for us was, as we started to get interested in this notion of urban and ecology and how to integrate the two, and this question of scale, it became kind of obvious for us that we still need vision. I mean, even if the master plan is maybe dead, the idea that as architects what we do is put ideas in the world at very large scales to actually produce desire, produce an audience. Of course, it's one thing where we have to sit down and receive kind of information. But as architects, we also can produce an audience. We can sort of make suggestion, invitation to think about how to live in the world differently. And that's a very powerful tool. As Reinhold Martin always says, a professor here, architects don't build, they draw. And Corbusier drew Radiant City that kind of got multiplied. So what should we draw today that can kind of embody the scale at which we need to think about changing how we live? And so these are just kind of speculative propositions that somehow, and for students here, can have both be instrumental in the way that we produce our own work. Suddenly you get people who come back to you and say, I'd like to do X, but also kind of shift the frames of references. In 49 Cities, the way we structured the book is kind of similar to how we try to bring together things in our practice, which is, on the one hand, there's performance, right? The kind of data and questions of density and measure. But on the other hand, there's form, there's shape, there is a kind of the alchemy when we put things together, representations in the world, and they kind of resonate. This is Ocean City by Kikutake. The Japanese metabolists were already thinking about questions of density and systems thinking, and what are we going to do with Tokyo when population is booming, and they were thinking about living on water. And so I think books and incidents are nevertheless interesting in terms of revisiting. We've been there in another form, and what happened, and learning from history to kind of recast the problem in a different way. And so we do a lot of these sort of speculative projects just to get us thinking. This was a kind of a client came to us and said, we want a kind of new development in downtown Manhattan. And we said, well, we need new typologies of living that have to do with the sun, with kind of greening the roofs, but also thinking about the tower in a new way, where we need to reinvent the private core of a building to actually serve the public and become part of the system, part of the infrastructure. Water systems, waste, composting systems. Every building can produce more than for itself. And so there was a kind of thickening of the core as an idea. The idea of putting architecture where it doesn't belong, trying to push its limits. How do you integrate a kind of urban context with the idea of food production? So this was a proposal for a fish farm sculpture in the middle of Shenzhen. Again, kind of provocations for new ideas for kind of buildings, or taking over existing buildings. Preservation, is absolutely key. And this was a proposal we did for the Guggenheim, where we said, you should just flood the Guggenheim to have a flow show where you can experience the art, and the water could be cleaned by this kind of mountain of greenery in the middle. And that goes back to your Bear idea, to put images out in the world that kind of change how we think about our existing buildings. And sometimes as architects, we get too attached to buildings and we need to erase them. And so often our thinking is about, erasing architecture, erasing buildings, and imagining what is in between to be more important. And in this case was a proposal for infrastructure to turn all of the road infrastructure in a neighborhood in Brooklyn into a kind of farming, kind of productive landscape. And that goes from the kind of large scale of urban thinking to this questions of second nature inside. We have to reinvent nature. And so how do we frame it even inside our small living, hopefully smaller and more dense living kind of compact experiences is quite interesting. Designing for other species is something that we like to think about. And again, it's just a provocative image, but that was our first project. It was a doghouse. And I think we should take that very seriously, that we should think about designing for other species. And so thinking about speculative work and how when you make a proposal out, it kind of finds its way back. Sometimes this was Public Farm 1, also at PS1 MoMA. Previous entries for that competition had been quite interested in just kind of formal material explorations, and we came in as a result of our research with 49 cities thinking architecture needs to act as infrastructure again. It needs to do more than just express itself, and propose a 1/4-acre organic farm in the middle of the courtyard, all built out of cardboard, going from the ground all the way to 30 feet, and this kind of building of a large kind of infrastructural structure through the kind of micro unit of these pretty generic cardboard tubes, providing shade, but also organizing a series of experiences, public experiences underneath, and of interactivity. So this is the structure. With kind of engaging at a smaller scale at the ground, all of it was solar powered, recycling the water from the roofs of PS1 MoMA. We designed a picking skirt for the farmers. And actually, you know, what was interesting for us about the project is that it mobilized many different networks of people, from farmers to scientists to artists, but also a lot of the plants were grown on Rikers Island, and then some of the kind of felons kind of came out and they were farming the structure throughout the summer. So architecture can organize networks, as we've heard today, and it can move in both ways. You can first have the network and create a resulting structure, or you can put a structure, a proposition in the world, and that provokes a certain series of networks. This is the farming, the pool, the party, the kind of highest level with interactive columns. This was to be able to see the farm. And then designing for chickens as part of the proposal. But so what was interesting about that project is that it kind of came back actually as a commission where Alice Waters, the food chef and activist, and her partner here, partner institution Edible Schoolyard NYC, came to us and said, we want to design the first Edible Schoolyard NYC in New York. And so taking all that knowledge that we had accumulated with PS1, the idea is to design one edible schoolyard in each borough. The first one is in Brooklyn, in Gravesend, and we took over half, so double the public farm one scale, took half an acre, turned it into an edible garden. We kind of removed 2 feet of soil, brought organic soil from upstate New York, and built this kind of outdoor classroom. So this is really integrated within the curriculum, food as a way to learn about culture, learn about science, and kind of learn to think about the quote-unquote environment in new ways. And then after the garden was built, a year later, we built the actual structure. And what was interesting about building the garden first is that we were able to get a lot of feedback in terms of the needs for the building. We compressed the building quite a bit and designed it really as kind of a very compressed Russian doll of 3 parts, a greenhouse, a kitchen classroom, and then what we call the systems wall, where all of the systems of the building, the water collection, the composting, the chicken coop, etc., are contained and expressed in these very playful shapes. And so this is a kind of 3-part building. The slope of the greenhouse and the kitchen classroom are designed to collect the water, which is collected in one of the systems wall units and then gets kind of fed back to the garden. So through the water systems is a kind of integration of the building and the landscape. So this is the kind of 3-part building. It was kind of interesting for us to negotiate through the facade, the scale of the residential neighborhood with the scale of the school, using these tiles that are quite residential but used in a different context here. So here you see the systems wall, the greenhouse, which is used quite a bit obviously during the winter. It's become really used not only by the school, but the community around as well throughout the year. And so the second one we're doing is in Harlem at PS7. This one is different in that we are not taking over the soil. We're creating planters on the ground and then a roof garden at another level of the school. So it's a kind of 2-part intervention in terms of the green space, and then the greenhouse acts as a bridge between 2 existing structures here, and the water's collected with the kind of flower. So these are the planters, which are now built. So we've always started with the garden. But I wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit because this is one scale of operation, but going back to speculative work and how that can inform actual projects. It's one thing to intervene strategically in places like New York, but if you think of places like China, they are deploying, master plans at a speed that we've never seen. So how do we engage that speed as well? This is Nature City, a project we designed for an exhibition at MoMA called Foreclosed, Rehousing the American Dream. And we collaborated with Eric Sanderson and Jerry Frug and a number of other engineers. And it was this collaboration that really generated the project in terms of trying to negotiate the maximum urbanity with the maximum kind of natural space. So that became the project, how to reinvent the suburb for the 21st century, taking very seriously the desire for both the kind of built and the unbuilt. I won't go into detail, but it was in a way more than a master plan, a kind of strategic vision of kind of alternated maximum density and then creating very large swath of green space for wildlife to exist and also to cross in a north-south direction. Through kind of the section of the built, creating a diversity of landscapes, productive landscapes, but also rethinking housing, where every single housing block can also be an infrastructural system, collecting water, recycling, power collection, power production, etc. So in the spirit of putting something out there that kind of gets a reaction, it was interesting to have the audience at MoMA interact with the model and imagine, hey, I could live here and it doesn't look like my single kind of house. So this is the kind of water collection structure, housing. This was the high rise of homes. So really kind of proposing a different idea, the composting, housing, a different idea of living and making it quite architectural. Courtyard. And then finally this, which was the highest density, which is, yes, you can have your individual home, but if we just got rid of what was in between and put the garden on the roof, we would really kind of create much a higher density of living. 0. Okay, well, I'll stop here. Thank you.
So I also almost every night have Klaus Jacob dreams or nightmares, but I would like to share with you one other nightmare that maybe I also sometimes have in dealing with resilience and thinking about how does that fit within the discipline that I have as a designer. I'm the final speaker today. And I think there's a lot of ground that is covered. So I'm going to talk about some stuff that is really small, which is like how do we translate all these ideas about risk, complex adaptive systems, social design, how do they end up in form? And because as designers and as architects, we use form. We use our form to make our projects resilient, and we implement resilient projects to make resilient cities. And one of the nightmares that I have in between the Klaus Jacob dreams is about the 70s, or the 50s, 60s, and 70s in the Netherlands and in much of Europe, where, and this is a quote from the end of that period, there is nothing to design, that what started out as an ambition by designers, as a reaction to the linearity and the top-down logics of modernism, that they wanted to create designs that were as complex as the world itself. They felt that modernism had a sort of totalitarian reduction tendency towards reduction, and they made complex design. And these designs became ever more complex. This is Aldo van Eyck, the great Dutch hero, Habraken, who thought about the relationship between the overall structures and the flexibility of the inside. But what you also saw that in that search for this complexity, there was people traveled to Africa, people tried to think about the human aspect. But in the end, you saw that the design as we know it, the use of form started to be reduced. In the 70s, you had a lot of community activism, which was very powerful and helped save our cities. But at the same time, it produced an architecture that was so small scale, so unarchitectural in a way as we knew it, that it could barely let's say, have significance for us. And in the end, of course, they ended up with writing poetry. And we all know what Lutyens said about architects who write poetry. So I think really one of the challenges of resilience is how it's a result of the realization that linear engineering solutions might destroy more than they mitigate, that the control embedded in the notion of sustainability is not there, that working on the large scale is impossible given our society's atomization, or said more positively, undesirable given our society's diversity. And I think while times have changed since the 70s, I think a lot of these things are still there. And so the question becomes, how do we as architects deal with that in strictly the formal sense? So it's not about the agendas. And I really think one of the things is that we need to learn how to link the small scale of the implementable project to the prototype to the big picture. That is one of the big challenges that we have. And of course, we've been talking a lot about prototyping, a lot about big pictures, but how do you make that link? And one of the lessons that I have is from this dream that I had of Piet Dirk flying in a helicopter over New York. He actually never flew in a helicopter over New York. This is in Holland, but basically the idea from the helicopter view was the typical Dutch solution of creating flood barriers under the Verrazano Bridge. And in the Netherlands, we've been very successful with building those. They've also brought with them ecological devastation. And as a result, of course, Piet, as the most eminent Dutch water expert, was prescient in thinking about these things. But after Sandy, it turned out that the recommendations from the New York Panel of Climate Change were not to do these big projects, but to do actually a whole set of small projects, many of them, because resiliency is in a way a redundancy. How then does the one big project that they drew, the big U, fits in? Of course, it needed to protect a highly valuable portion of real estate, and the idea of the SIR report was to make an 8 or 10 mile continuous integrated flood protection structure. And as you know, I don't want to talk too much about the big U, just one aspect about it. What we said with the team and which we worked on this project was to say, well, you shouldn't look at this as a big project. What it really is, it is a series of small projects. The big U should be brought down to smaller pieces so that it can start to function on a community level, so that you can start to really think about it as a sort of community infrastructure. And the analogy that we brought there was that of the hull of a ship, in which one of the compartments could be breached and the ship would still think. So the big U is not a big U, it is a series of small U's, where each compartment in themselves can be contained by going upland, so that many things can be organized at a much more local scale. And these smaller U's really mean that it becomes manageable. And that manageability is, I think, part of its success. HUD was able to fund the first compartment because we designed it such that we knew that the funding stream of HUD would be big enough and that we had a strong constituency behind it. You see that because of the fact that it's a smaller project, that all kinds of other agencies and communities can find their agendas in it, and that because of the fact that it's manageable, move forward, other agencies, other people, other actors in the city start to cling on to it. And so the project in a way sort of increases in its richness. And you now see that from that initial part, HUD funded, the sort of second part is starting to grow. The city has put money on the table. They won the NDRC competition. And even here, you see the city for the next phase moving the big U, not thinking of it as a big U, but as something that is made out of smaller parts, and maybe will end up somewhere that it will be a big U, but the value in the small U's is massive. At the same time, what I think is exciting about this project is that it not only is a series of small projects, but it's also a logo, it's also a gestalt, it's also something at which communities can think about, this is what we want, this is what we're going to get. So it's also, in a way, the big U as a name, as even a brand, we sort of bring it to the back because things are working well. It's something that is very strong. It works in our media age. In the 70s, this wouldn't have worked. Maybe you didn't have to make, you just have to write a poem. But in this era, you need to make something big. And we do something similar about 10 years before that for Paris, where we really try to make sure that the big scale of Paris became a small scale so that they did not have to go through another trauma, and we really built a project up from the ground in which we said, if you have this big image, you can actually be really flexible in its execution. You can be really smart about it. And we added to that another series of formal interventions, the overriding image, but also the use of circles as a sort of non-fixating geometry through which, in a way, create a flexibility. So I can give a Fidel Castro length talk about circles some other time, but I will not do that now. The second part is we need to rethink our aesthetic control so that others, communities, scientists, politicians can engage and the project can adapt while maintaining in a way the solace of cohesion. I think there's something about architecture and our built environment in giving solace, in giving that we feel protected by it, that there's a sort of that. And at first I never understood this project. From an engineering perspective, it's ridiculous to build so many outer walls where you could be much more efficient. But I understood it only later when I said this project of Aravena is really about the community. It is inefficient, but it doesn't matter that it's inefficient. It is about the fact that people can build their own houses in that and come together. And we need to accept that inefficiency. That, in a way, is what makes it valuable. We've been talking a lot about that as well. And I think the genius of Aravena is, on the one hand, he created a sort of what Habraken would call a control hierarchy. He created something which had an overriding aesthetic which allowed him to win the Pritzker Prize, and at the same time accept the mess in a positive sense that communities bring into these processes. I really think that that is great. And really what you see is that architecture has a role there. Architecture has a role in creating communities and health benefits for communities. This is of course where architecture often has gone from the modernist organization to the to it being taken over by refugees here in Tbilisi after the earthquakes and the civil wars. And you really question yourself that if this is such a vital way of architecture being able to transform yourself itself, can we make an architecture that is better at doing that while creating a cohesion? Because in a way, this mimicry of this architecture, which again is thought top-down and which doesn't have this livability, MVRDV is not the solution. And there again, the 70s can be a great inspiration. This is Lucien Kroll's critique of modernism and of the way in which orders, geometry, composition, actually important parts in our architectural vocabulary also create the conditions that are not adaptive, that are not flexible, that cannot change, that cannot have inputs. And Lucien Kroll's answer to the challenges of modernism were this, but what I really think is a wonderful potential answer is in this architecture, which is the architecture by Alvar Aalto, which is very well described in a book by the French architectural theorist Philippe Baudon. It's called Sur l'espace architectural, and it's been a bit too much to explain the entire book. But what he says is, in architecture, you can create in architecture an autonomy of measurements in which the subordination of windows to the repetitiveness of the main structures that characterizes modern architecture, and that extends from the most squalid low rental housing to the superb Mies van der Rohe buildings, and that you can change that by theorizing the disconnect between the related elements, by creating the distinction between, let's say, the architectural scale and the geometrical scale. And this project is fantastic in the sense that it basically has no geometry. It's just filled with architecture. And I think that, in the same way that we can learn a lot from circles, is fantastic. It's something that we also learned a lot in a project that we did in the Netherlands, where we discovered that the fact that this building was meant to, this building complex, it was meant to appear as if it's been there forever. It's from 1956. Because the Catholic Church wanted to appear as if they've been there forever, was made in such a way that it mimicked an organic architecture. And when you then start changing an architecture like that, you can actually change it to the highly technological needs of, in this case, a new hospital and community center. And I really will not go any further into the third element, because I think Amale has given a fantastic example there, but I think that one of the crucial elements of Rebuild by Design should be to rediscover, of Resilience by Design University, should be really to rediscover the aesthetic tools that we have in order to make our architecture as the last final point of this arc. Thank you very much, and I'd like to ask the three of you to come forward and have a chat. Thank you. I'm going to stand there because I saw Amy do that and it was so convenient. Thank you for your great talks. I think we might pivot with two deans and Henk on the table also to a reflection on the entire day so far and on, let's say, the didactics of Resilience by Design University. But before that, I have a question to ask you, and maybe ask you all. Marilyn made the, I don't think it was a mistake, but she said it's resistance by design. And I think that's actually very good, given. Well, I think given the day, I think there's a lot of resistance to be done. We're in a way also as designers trapped in a world that we can only control to a limited extent. And resilience can be argued in different ways. Some people say it's a tool of capitalism in which you accept risks. Other people say it is actually fantastic to accept risk because it leads to innovation and it can lead to unforeseen outcomes, and it can engage not normal constituencies. So there's a whole lot of things to be said there. My question, given that we're also going to have Resistance by Design University very soon, to Henk is to start is to what I think one of the things that designers can do very well is also to break up systems and to break up power structures. Can you, from your experience as someone who has been in government, give us examples where that worked or also where that really backfired?
Yes. One comment in advance. I was part of a UN panel this morning in preparation of the new urban agenda for Habitat 3. And one of the complaints of the UN officials was all designers left the UN. And that is actually working to the failure of the UN to deal with a comprehensive approach. So we just left them alone. That's a part of the answer to your question, is that if the designer is not in the equation, is not part of the collaboration, and not part of the organization anymore, the disruptive quality of design and designers is not in the room. So you have to have them in first. And when they leave, and I can imagine you would leave the UN, so that, I mean, I don't blame them for that. It's very tough. But then the challenge becomes bigger. I joined the government not so long ago, actually, hopefully with that disruptive quality. But then you have to empower the designer within the organization, but also empower a collaborative effort. So if from within a government you can build a coalition amongst stakeholders and put the design and the designers as part of that, you get to that disruptive quality. And you've been part of some of those processes. Long-term vision for the western part of the Netherlands, we call the Randstad, has had a disruptive impact on the way the organization actually approached planning. And therefore changed the way how the decision-making on infrastructure funding was made. So a design process led to a changing organization, led to a changing process that actually changed the way how we invested now and for the future into the Randstad. So that is actually impacting billions of euros. So that's an example. Another example is our Olympic strategy, where the design actually drove the vision making, the collaboration, the information, the whole community process, and then politics decided against it. So therefore design was so clear that with that on the table, the whole parliament in the Netherlands says no. So design can have that quality of clearance, of clarity, that will backfire. So the two examples.
Can we teach resistance and resilience in schools? Marilyn?
Well, resistance is already there, so maybe it's a challenge for resilience. I was going to pick on what Henk said and get to that, if I may. I remember one of the first things that happened to me as I went to work on a really big infrastructure project is they sort of said, well, the architects are welcome at the table and you can sit over there. And oh, by the way, we just want you to know that we've achieved all the trip time goals we need for the railroad between Washington and New York and Boston, as long as we don't stop along the way. I'm going like, okay, this is a project for passenger rail, and we're not going to stop along the way. Wait a minute, what is wrong with this? And I think that it is why it's fundamentally important to learn that skill of pushing a little bit to get yourself to the table. And what I find, just as a quick answer to your question, because it's a very large one, is there's an enormous advantage to being in a city where city government is of a size. So let's say this is 1 million people or 1.5 million people. We don't really live in tiny little places anymore, where the government still, where the city planning department and the utilities department and the water management department actually still really take interns and come and teach at your school. And so what I think to the question of how do you teach the ideas of resilience in school is that opportunity to participate early on and to see what is not being said that you think should be said, particularly while you're still somewhat idealistic and ready to push the limits of an idea. After all, that's a lot of what our education is about. And in that kind of relatively friendly circumstance, I find that our students can have a really good experience of understanding what it is to be that voice, and they become surprisingly engaged in it. Now, there's some students out there who might answer this better than I do, but in any case, I think that there is no question, without calling it a resilience curriculum per se, that building in the ideas of using more elaborate, building elaborate interrelationships among the players of a team around a table where all voices are relatively equal is an extraordinary learning experience about the potential to take on the really difficult, complex projects.
Amale?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that I think it's really great to say, actually, we're going to do a resilience curriculum, because if you think about the legacy of many of our schools, you know, if you think about the AA in London with Boyarsky, you know, he was like, forget curriculum, it's not about curriculum. You know, the school is designing all these things and the events and this and somehow the curriculums in all our schools stayed the same, you know, where you say things like, oh, we're a global school, yes, but we have classes called non-Western. Like, how does that work, right? So, like, I think it's really time to renovate what we call the core, or, you know, what we call our curriculum, to try to create these intersections, these scalar intersections, because students come in and they have an agility and a facility to cross. You know, they don't know, you know, what architecture is, and I think we shouldn't tell them what it is. We should allow them to, you know, to create what it is for themselves by crafting new ways to connect across disciplines that no longer serve our needs. I mean, the disciplines were created at a time that world is gone. So the idea that we should be creating new disciplines and new curriculum is fantastic.
The room. Does anyone want to comment or has a question on this, specifically on I think the question that we're all wondering, at least I'm wondering about, is like, can we make this into a curriculum? Can such a thing as Resilience by Design University become something that is important and that can really change the design school? Anyone for remarks? I see a remark there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Yasmin Vega. I'm a recent graduate of the Urban Planning Master's Program here at GSAPP. And my question, I'm sorry, doesn't address the curriculum, but maybe it does in a way. This panel is called New Planning Forms, and I had the understanding that there will be some discussion about urban planning and how it fits into design and planning for resilience and how architecture can meld this all together. And I would just like to hear a little more about about architects speaking about their opinion of where urban planning fits into, you know, new planning forms and these strategic visions. And I would just like to hear you guys speak about urban planning in the sense that about the things that we've brought up.
Well, I can start. The chairman of our planning department at PennDesign, I think, famously exaggerates a point to get to a place where it's not a tremendously frightening idea, but where it's one that our students in planning have to think about a lot, which is this world has changed so much, to Amale's point, that John Landis, I think, correctly says, you realize that none of you are going to be paid to do 80% of what planners did 10 years ago. it's all going to be done for you, with you, assembled. Your job will be to see what's going on, to get the patterns. But in that, there is, I think, exactly by analogy, the same kind of freedom and opportunity to explore and create new forms of projects, because it becomes our responsibility to say, this is what we know how to do, and this is what we have to bring in concept, in vision, and in execution to the challenges that we're facing. So I think that our school is so cross-disciplinary that we tend to use designer as a collective term. It's not a very good collective term, but in our school it includes planners and specialists in the public realm and artists who are doing commissions there, just because you can't go down the list all the time. I think at the same time that there are points of entry that come from a very different perspective. And for us, planning is expanding into the design, the design of special purpose corporations and authorities, and how they leap across boundaries, but maybe exist only for the life of a project rather than becoming heavy under their own weight when things go forward. They're also working on value capture schemes that prove for some of this infrastructure that we say we can't afford. I don't know if there's all the money we need. I tend to believe there's not. But for the projects that gain an understanding that they will serve many purposes, money is there to capture and use through the financial tools that we have. So my advocacy here is those are directions that planning need to go to be part of this improved agency, but really improved ability to lift the aspirations towards what we know we need to do.
And this morning when Eric asked the room, who was in the room, you forgot to ask if there were business school people or entrepreneurs in the room. I hear you talk, and in a way you all talk about it, the fact that we need to also make business plans. Rebuild by Design, in a way, was that as much as anything else. Is that the one element that, of all the elements that we're lacking in today's discussion, one of the things that we're definitely lacking?
Yeah, probably. I mean, just to continue a little bit on the question, and from my perspective, what was great about the day is you don't say, here's the problem, how do I deal with it, in the way that I understand what planning has been for the last 60 years, in the way that I understand how architecture has been siloed for the, you don't come at it from the disciplinary, you actually take a risk in eroding the disciplines to say, no, these are new tools, these are new ways that we can organize ourselves, these are, and I think, so to answer your question, Matthijs, yeah, I think that probably we would need maybe more governmental representation and then more business and entrepreneurial representation, et cetera, et cetera. And if I think about Rebuild by Design and I think about this day and the kind of slowly nesting of all these, disciplines and expertise, it's quite, that slide, kind of gaining momentum is then, like a snowball effect. And I think certainly it would be great to kind of include more entrepreneurial / business thinking or planning.
A business plan is just a proposition to attract all the assets and resources, human capital and physical, that you need. It's a perfectly appropriate concept for us to use, but I suspect we'll do it our way.
I see a lot of fingers. Let's go in the back of the room.
My name is Alex Banky. I'm a marketing student at Credit Institute. I have a question about materiality and how do you avoid the monolith, and also the role of waste consumption within the role of so how do we deal with waste if we do deal with monoliths and concrete and all these structural elements, and what's the role of and how does that work into this kind of resilience by design?
Any one of us wants to answer that?
Waste would be one of the many, many ingredients we need to integrate in our systems thinking. And I think there were some examples. I don't know if in the Big U you deal with it.
They were in the third part of my my talk,
Yeah,
but
there you go.
I ran out of time. Yeah.
So next time, Matthias will show.
No, but what I think about, I'm not sure about the monolith, but I do think that one of the challenges is that as designers, maybe in the 20th century, our world was organized through space and territory. Now it's not organized like that at all. And one of the things that we need to think about as designers is what are these other systems? They can be social systems, they can be physical systems that we're dealing with. And what you see that, for instance, waste, resource streams, energy, water have become more and more part of the design briefs. And I think if we think about that well, and making these systems part of the visual domain, such that they can be appropriated, discussed, protested against, but also embraced because of the benefits that they have, that would be really fantastic and a huge and exciting challenge for designers.
I think the other thing that's interesting, though, is your use of the word monolith, and maybe we can talk about this later, but I think that, interestingly enough, because we didn't plan this out, each one of us made an advocacy for the big idea, the big framework that breaks into very small steps that can break into relatively small steps of differentiated prototypes, testings that integrate to the whole, and that we need to have the confidence that we can do that rather than thinking we are taking the fattest magic marker ever and drawing a big line across a page. In fact, we're doing something that has much more finesse than that.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I love the Big U idea and the small U's, and how the small U's are different relative to the Big U. And it's such a New York grid idea. You know, you set up the framework, the infrastructure, but then you differentiate within that. So.
Yeah, sometimes language is important. So I like the progress from rebuild by design to resilience by design as a direction. But can we leapfrog over resilience and do sustainability by design? It has a more forward-looking and not this kind of feeling resilience. And it includes the future more. I really have a problem with resilience by design, and I wonder whether you want to volunteer to think about calling it a course and educating the students through design for the sustainability.
Maybe others want to participate in this. This is a huge choice of word. My feeling about this is that resilience and sustainability are not the same, but they actually overlap in very significant ways, and that at some sense we make more progress by each in our own way working on that progress of what it means to be resilient, which is to extend the life and the vitality through a redefinition process as opposed to what you might give as a definition of sustainability. I think they both move between the large and the small idea, the personal responsibility on one hand and the collective responsibility on the other, that are things that we have to go toward. And if people find themselves more comfortable or more intent upon engagement in one of those paths through a project, I think we're still aiming for the same thing. But it's a much longer discussion that would be worth having.
Would you like to add to this discussion?
I want to make a connection between the last three questions, and Amy's pushing us to end. So before it's left out of the room, you asked a question on the education of the designer, which is also part of what is the agenda on the research. Second, then there's the question of language, or is it a monolith? Where does the waste go, or do we prototype? I think the thing we're forgetting is that part of the education is that the designer can actually be helping on the process and the governance. So that's not the business school. But it is that the designer is actually capable of helping to organize, design, and develop something that we called Rebuild by Design, or a studio in the Netherlands on the South Wing, or the Olympics, or whatever. So the governance, organizational capacity of the designer should be part of the curriculum as well. And we've been talking today not about that, which is interesting, because Rebuild by Design was the process. It's the only thing. And it was actually done by designers. Although the outcomes, of course, are 6 winning projects, the part why Rebuild by Design was so critical is that designers actually developed the process. And that the team and the coalition that was part of the process went crazy every day because of that. Because the designers informed the process and every day was different. And nobody actually was capable of dealing with it except for those thousands of people and hundreds of organizations that were part of the process. So all of a sudden we left aside government in the normal way. We left aside policy and regulations. No, we believed in a process that was totally adaptive, changed every day. And why? Because the need was clear and on the table. But also there were people. People that took the risk to invest in a process that was totally unpredictable. And I think that part, and perhaps that's what Eric meant when it was on how do you guide these processes that we called Rebuild by Design? It's because some people have that belief. And I want to get away from leadership questions, but I do think people like Sean Donovan and others actually had the capability to step up and say, I'll take the risk. We'll do it. And you designers, by designing a process that I don't even understand, I believe in you, so let's challenge that. And I think when schools, universities can capture design as a process next to all the other things we discussed today, perhaps it will add to the resiliency and sustainability metaphor as well.
But I love the fact that you use the verb invest.
Yes.
Because I actually think that's one of the shifts of mind that we have to bring designers into not only comfort with, but utility with. Because we can lead investments that will really make a difference.
And we do. And the woman that's in charge of the Green Climate Fund, and her last name is so complex. It's more complex than Rebuild by Design. So I always forget. But the first name is Hella. She has $500 billion on the table and no projects. Why? And she blames the institutional world. Why? She has no process. And we can actually help with the process.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about the process. So that's crazy. We have to talk about it.
Thank you, Henk. Before we, I'm sorry for overruling you a bit, but we'll finish in a couple of minutes. But before that, I would like to ask Eric and Kate, who have been, and Amy, who have been very much part of the discussion that we've been having in the last year in preparation of this. If you have any questions or remarks that you would like to put to the table.
So I'll say one thing. Am I okay? So I'll say one comment about the sustainability versus resilience concept, and one concept about your participation and input, and this question about designing something together. The comment about resilience, which as Matthias knows, I also had all sorts of issues with along the way. Is that I think one of my concerns about the conversation today is how little time we've spent thinking about designing mitigation and thinking about how we reduce our carbon footprint as a design problem, not just, where do we get alternative sources of energy, but how do we think about the way that we've settled, the way that we consume, the way we've organized our lives, culturally and economically as problems that are amenable to the same kind of design thinking. And probably we all take some responsibility for just not seeing that in advance, but I would hope that in future conversations like this, whether it's resilience or sustainability, that we make sure that we are on that other issue as well, because it shouldn't just be about how we adapt to the inevitable weather that's coming. There needs to be something else in it that's proactive. So I really want us to push on that. What that raises for me also is a kind of side conversation I've had with a few people today about this issue of stakeholder participation, which in many contexts means architects and designers and planners going to neighborhoods, but in this context means also us coming to you and saying, how do we think about doing this better collaboratively? We've designed, so we didn't have as much time as I think I would have liked for conversation at the end of the panels. And we have some surveys out there that we're asking everyone to do. But we also really do need to find some robust feedback from you so that we can think about what it would be like to build upon what we did today and to improve curriculum and a way of kind of taking some leadership role in this emerging movement to teach these things. Because I think regardless of whether we issue any report or establish a network, we now live in a world where people are going to be teaching resilience or sustainability inevitably, right? All over the world, and students are going to be studying it. And so if we want to make any kind of contribution to that, we have to think about a way to take advantage of the collective intelligence we have in the room from a really long, full, and rich day. So please, there's wine outside, and I know everyone has earned a cocktail at this point in the day. This is a really packed day. But let me just ask on behalf of the fellow organizers, please do take time to take that piece of paper out there and fill out the survey. It's so worth it. We'll buy you an extra drink if you fill out the survey.
It's free.
Better get in line now.
Someone paid for that. Thank you, Judith Rodin, for the second drink. So please do that. And if you get some kind of email from us asking for more participation, for more feedback, we're not just kind of filing those things away. We are actively thinking about how we can make this process better. And it's an exciting moment, right? And I've heard Marilyn say to design students for years now, no matter what you do with your career, whether it's business or design or social science or community organizing, you're going to be working on global warming, climate change, and its consequences. Like we're all in it. And so to the extent that we can get ahead of it with your help and participation, it would be an amazing thing. So that's my very long-winded way of saying thank you to Matthias.
Really, Eric said it all. I mean, this was an experiment that came out of a process where more than 200 people came together. Architects, engineers, landscape architects, scientists, students, on and on, and came together to try and come up with some ideas, some big ideas after Hurricane Sandy. And what we realized at the end of that process was there were actually hundreds of more students that had contributed to the process. And as organizers, we didn't realize that till the end, because so many of our design team members were actually teaching students at the same time. So we really wanted to figure out a way to capture that and to use that momentum moving forward. And we've done this is now our biggest event. We've now done 3 little small things. Each one have been an experiment, and as Eric said, we really do want your feedback to figure out what's next. What I'd really like in your feedback is to figure out what are the things that people said that have really been thought-provoking that you'd like to then unpack into a panel discussion or an event or something like that. Because when we were putting together this day, we thought of it as a 15-week curriculum, and we would have a panel, and there would be 15 panels. But what we don't want to do is replicate things that you're already learning in school. and things that are already out there. We really want to be more creative about what we're presenting and talking about because we're not actually a university, we just stole that name. So, but we obviously work with lots of universities. So just,
Hey, no competition, huh?
think about that and really think about what are the things that you learned today that you wouldn't have learned in school that you think were really helpful to your studies or might impact the way that you go back and do some of your homework. So, oh, and tomorrow, for those of you who are joining us tomorrow, we are at capacity. We are actually 40 people over on our waiting list at a place that's smaller than this. So if you've already signed up, please come. If you haven't, we may not be able to fit you. But I just want to remind everybody that it is at NYU Institute for Public Knowledge downtown, and it starts at 10 a.m. And we would love to have you, even though I'm not allowed to say that because we're already at capacity. But we won't turn anyone away. And I just really want to thank everyone. I mean, all of our partners. Columbia, thank you so much for hosting us. It's been a wonderful location. NYU's Institute for Public Knowledge, PennDesign, NJIT, the New School, Yale, Stevens, and 100 Resilient Cities. Let's all toast outside together.